I have learnt many things now that I have finished my opening sequence when looking back at my preliminary task. Firstly, I see that by knowing the importance of the 180-degree rule in my preliminary task, I have managed to translate it into my finished production work. I think it was relevant to know its importance as it allowed a swift continuity edit in my final piece, so that the audience didn't become confused with the placement of the characters and overall the sequence would flow better. Also, I learned in my preliminary task that if the line was broken, a pan round must be visible. However, the line didn't need to be broken in my opening sequence, so the technique wasn't necessary. Secondly, the techniques I learned in my preliminary task, like match on action and shot reverse shot, were also evident in my finished opening sequence. I learned to include the shot reverse shot technique in my opening sequence as it is beneficial for conversations that take place within the scene, because it allows the audience to get a clearer idea of who's talking and therefore continuity is there and easily recognised. Match on action is crucial as it breaks up movements, as I learnt in my prelim. This is evident in my prelim when the character of Sammy opens the door and when Carlson lights his cigarette. I used the technique in the sequence when the character Phoebe opens the vodka bottle and Alex opens his front door. I used it as it is more aesthetically pleasing, as it helps to break up movements and make the sequence flow better. In regards to camera work, I have already mentioned how I used a pan in my preliminary task to cross the 180-degree line. The problem was that it was done freehand, meaning the camera was shaky and it was more time consuming as the pace needed to be slowed down. I learnt from that in my opening sequence to make sure to always pan using the tripod, as it gives a smoother movement to the whole shot. Shaky hand was also evident in some other shots that were done, which again reinforced my understanding that the tripod needed to be used. I also recognised camera work and angles as important due to my research in cinematography. When learning about it, I made sure that certain camera angles were used to connote certain meanings, e.g. in my prelim, I used angles such as a low angle of Carlson shouting at Sammy to show his authority. The same concept was applied in my opening sequence when a close-up is shown of Ethan grabbing Laura's hand, as the camera angle allows the audience to witness Ethan's dominance. Lighting also came under cinematography. I learnt that low-key lighting is evident in such films like horror and thriller films and is created by having a key light and a background light. Low-key lighting is essential in thrillers to connote a dark and mysterious feel, which is a typical convention of the genre. In my prelim, I used a proper lighting equipment as my key light and background light to create the obvious shadowing which is commonly seen in film noir. Yet in my opening sequence I used the sun as my key light and relied on post-editing to create a darker feel so the sequence would fit into the genre. Mise-en-scène was another aspect I learnt to improve on. In my preliminary task, the setting was meant to be an office in 1950s America. I decided to fully incorporate the film noir theme, yet computers are present throughout the clip, and as well as that, some lighting equipment appeared in the frame as well as unwanted actors. I made sure to always check the scene when directing the opening sequence and reshot scenes to make sure they were as good as they could be. Lastly, the editing with both my preliminary task and opening sequence had not changed too much. The editing was mostly fine throughout the prelim when using Adobe Premiere, with only a couple of issues present. Sometimes the clips were cut so that the actions between the cuts were jerky and transitions fades were not always used correctly, meaning that an overlay of the clip was left then cut out quickly. Both meant that continuity was lessened in the prelim. I learned to edit this in my opening sequence by adding film dissolve transitions to the clip so that the transitions flowed, and when cutting and putting clips together I made sure the actions were followed through into the next clips so continuity remained and actions weren't jerky. Overall, I had developed those skills learnt from the preliminary task in regards to continuity, editing, cinematography and digital media, and made sure I applied them with my opening sequence to get the best possible result.